reading today comes from Elliot Kemmler, who's the minister of a small New England town for almost 20 years. She says, last fall, our weekly small town newspaper had 2 stories I loved. One was a thank you note from the animal control officer to several residents for rescuing a herd of 5 ponies and 1 goat. Apparently the goat figured out how to unlock the barn gate and liberated everyone else while the owners were away. The ponies and the goat were trotting down the roads toward Dunkin' Donuts and who knows where else. Neighbors gathered, recognized, identified the runaways, and got everyone safely back to the barn. The second story was a plea from a reporter asking the person who had stolen a styrofoam gravestone to please return it to its rightful owner with no questions asked. The gravestone's creator sets up a free haunted house for the neighborhood, and we were all encouraged to keep an eye out for the missing stone, which at 4 feet tall should be hard to hide. The next week we got the reassuring news that the gravestone had been returned. This is small town life at its best. Drivers stop to let you in because if someone cuts you off, you'll see them later at the post office. At the dump, people set out their useful junk on a concrete wall so you can get rid of your own trash and come home with someone else's. We use town meetings as our form of governance, which means sitting in the middle school auditorium and voting on important things like whether we can afford a new senior center by raising our hands. There are no secret ballots, relatively few secrets at all. And for almost 400 years, people have managed to live together here, despite fierce disagreements. But these are not the best of times. Around the same time as the runaway goat and missing gravestone, our elected town leaders proposed putting up stones at the town entrance, engraved with the words, "All are welcome." And it quickly turned horrible. The welcome stones uncovered ugly things: mistrust, fear, racism, homophobia, barely buried beneath the surface of this rocky New England soil. Cruel and painful words were spoken. There were warnings about busloads of illegals and criminals who would arrive once those stones went up. The church I serve was accused of promoting a pro-gay, pro-immigrant agenda, which I was proud to confirm. When it came time to take the vote, after weeks of bitter argument and contempt on all sides, I had to force myself to keep my eyes open. I didn't want to see who voted no, but I knew I needed to look, to see my neighbors' faces in a moment which felt like a referendum on our community's heart. The vote to keep the welcome stones passed by a solid margin, for which I am grateful, but it was a painful time. Still, I choose to believe in community. I choose to believe in the difficult, slow work of building a common life. I believe in the strength and the goodness of neighbors living side by side, finding each other's lost goats and gravestones, even when we do not agree about things that matter deeply. The welcome stones have been put into place. The best hopes of those of us who wanted them have not come to pass, and neither have the worst fears of those who did not. Time will inevitably soften their edges. I pray we will become more able to live into the welcome they proclaim. In the meantime, we are still here, our lives interwoven in this place we call home. Now, we have many summer rituals in our little family, activities that we do every year that truly mark this season. Time with grandparents, late night movies, walks for ice cream, trips to the pool, and of course one of my personal favorites, the summer workbook. Every year in May, I head to the bookstore and I get several of those wonderful thick books with names like Summer Brain Quest, morning math busters, smart summer splash. My children, oddly enough, have never been as delighted about these treasures as I am. So the other day, Owen was working away quite grumpily, as you saw this morning, in his Summer Brain Quest book, and he came to the story of the tortoise and the hare. The activity was to read the story and then answer some questions. You all know this one, right? It goes something like, once upon a time, there was a speedy hare who bragged, "I am the fastest animal of them all." And a tortoise, tired of hearing the hare boast, challenged him, "Shall we race?" And the hare laughed at the tortoise. All of the animals came to watch the race. The race began and the hare sprinted ahead. The tortoise began walking at his slow and steady pace and didn't stop. The hare thought, "I am so fast. I have time to dance and time to relax." And he twirled and he boogied and he sat down and fell asleep. The hare woke up when he heard cheering. "Hooray for the tortoise," he heard. The hare walked to the crowd of animals at the finish line, and the tortoise said that familiar line we all know so well, "Slow and steady wins the race." So we read the story, and then we moved on to the questions, which were, what lesson did the tortoise learn? What was the lesson for the hare? And I was fascinated because is there any lesson here besides slow and steady wins the race? What else did they want him to take away from this tale? We talked about maybe the lesson for the hare was keep going and don't fall asleep. Pay attention to what's going on around you. Maybe being the fastest isn't what's most important. And then I began to wonder if there was more to this story than I previously believed. So Owen suggested that we rewrite the story. This was something they did a lot in first grade, looking at the Three Little Pigs or Little Red Riding Hood or the Gingerbread Man from the perspective of a different character, or come up with a different ending, or maybe put a surprise twist in the middle. So we decided to rewrite The Tortoise and the Hare. The first thing we did was to go back to the original. Is there something else that the hare could have learned besides that slow and steady persistence? The hare was a bit overconfident, we decided, a little too sure of himself and his abilities, a little too quick to underestimate his opponent. He messed up, plain and simple. He made a mistake. So our takeaway was that we could learn from our mistakes. We could learn from failure. We could look at what happened, what we did or didn't do as objectively as we could, and we could learn. From this, we decided that the hare most likely understood his folly. And instead of feeling like a failure and getting stuck in how he messed up, he picked himself up and challenged the tortoise to another contest. The tortoise, feeling confident in his recent win, accepted, and another race day was set. On the day of this race, the hare didn't think so little of his opponent. He remained alert and energetic, and this time, as you might predict, the hare won. What happened next? We asked. Did the tortoise wallow in self-pity and self-judgment, thinking how he could never keep up with the hare, how he would never win again? No, we thought. If we were writing this again, we would say that the tortoise was sitting along the side of a stream, and as he watched the water flowing by along the rocks, around the bend, he realized there were things that he could do that the hare could not. Sure, he would never be as fast as that hare, but he, the slow tortoise, could swim. So he challenged the hare once again, this time with the condition that he, the tortoise, would decide the path they would use. The hare, fresh off his win, readily agreed. The race began and the hare took the lead. After crossing a short distance, the hare stopped mid-track. For what was this before him? There was a river. that now spanned the distance between him and the finish line. And as he stood there wondering what he could do, the tortoise caught up, crossed that river with ease, and won. Now we have a hare who learned from his mistakes and a tortoise who learned to recognize his strengths. Instead of wallowing in what he couldn't do, he created the conditions in which he would succeed. Instead of comparing himself to the speedy hare, he recognized what made him unique, what made him strong, what would help him succeed. So we couldn't let it go just yet, right? There was more to be mined. And I think at this point, one of us was way more into it than the other. But one of us just couldn't let it go. So next, we imagine the tortoise on one side of the riverbank staring at the hare on the other. And at that moment, hint, this did not come from Owen, but don't tell him. At that moment, they realized they had grown quite fond of each other. They had spent a lot of time together with all these races, and they now considered one another friends. The tortoise swam back over to the hare, and they decided that with their combined strengths, they could accomplish great things. They began having team races in the forest, with the tortoise and the hare being an unbeatable pair. The hare would carry the tortoise on his back until they reached any water, and then the tortoise would take over. Alone, they each had their own gifts, but together they were unstoppable. And that is where we stopped. One of us had totally run out of steam. But we did have fun with this story, and I encourage you to try it. Take a story that you know really well and give it some twists and some turns, a new ending, a surprise middle. After we had done and he had gone off to do something else that did not involve his mother, I realized that this story that we had written, our new embellished tale, perhaps had something to say for all of us. Like the hare, we all make mistakes. Some of us more than others. And some of us will go to great lengths to avoid making one. Maybe you grew up in a family where no one ever admitted they were wrong. Yet being afraid to be wrong can keep us from trying new things. Some of us may do the same things over and over, even if they're not working, just because trying something new is scary. And there's a greater chance that we'll mess up. We'll say the wrong thing. We'll hurt someone. We may need to say, I'm sorry. The world's best wisdom says mistakes, even failures, are generative, necessary for growth. Mistakes are how you get to new knowledge. Thomas Edison said, I haven't failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that don't work. And George Bernard Shaw said, a life spent making mistakes is not only more honorable, but more useful than a life spent doing nothing. And Niels Bohr, who's a Danish Nobel Prize winner, said, an expert is a person who has made all the mistakes that can be made in a very narrow field. Most of us humans are a bit of a mess. Most of the time, fortunately, our transgressions are small. We forget what we love on a regular basis. We fall down and we fall short. We betray one another, often by accident, and then we let some strange mix of pride and fear and shame get in the way of what we need to do next, which is own it and speak it and say out loud, I messed up, I'm sorry, I'm asking for your forgiveness. Just like the hare in our reimagined story, we can make mistakes, we can learn, we can get up and try again. And when we can do this, we can remember the gifts we have each been given. Sometimes it's hard to admit. We don't want to toot our own horns, we don't want to flatter ourselves or boast about what makes us special. But we know that there are a lot of issues out there today. There's proof enough every morning that we are living in dangerous, depressing, desperate times. There are people who need your magic. There are causes that need your passion. There are groups that need your commitment. This is not a time to hide your strengths, your wisdom, and your light. I'm not asking you to single-handedly save the planet or the whales or the homeless. I'm asking you to consider the words of the ancient rabbinical fathers who said, "You are not expected to complete the work, but neither are you permitted to abandon it." The work is not yours to do alone, but there is work for you to do. My colleague Rob Hardy says the world is too beautiful to be saved by one voice, and too fragile to be held by one set of hands. What is your passion? What is calling to you? What breaks your heart and keeps you awake at night? What is one thing you can do, you, with all your talents, your gifts, your wisdom that you never believed you really had, your beauty and your strength? What is one thing that you, and only you, can do? One thing I love about these stories that we carry with us, these ones that we tell over and over again, like the tortoise and the hare, is that they acknowledge the degree of our elaborate interconnectedness and the extent to which the stories of others shape our own. These stories stay with us because they communicate an awareness about what is possible. They bring hope to those who are cynical or despairing. They remind us that our lives are woven together here with one another and with all living things. And we long to belong. We are each a bit like Rumple Buttercup. We look up from the tiny spaces we keep ourselves in, thinking that no one would really accept us if they knew how weird we truly are. And then, like Rumple, we realize we are all weird in one way or another. And we are far more alike than we could ever be different. We know we need one another to persevere. It's one of the great gifts of community. We come here to this place where we belong, to refill our wells so we can keep going, finding the things and the people that sustain us and make it possible for us to carry on. The African teacher and author Sobon Fusome said that a community is an environment where you can find a home in each other's heart and soul. It is a living entity where a group of people are empowered by one another to carry out their purpose and their power responsibly. Community empowers you to embrace your own gifts and hold space for all its members to work at becoming as close to their true selves as possible. Resilience, gratitude, faith, beauty, these you build together here, knowing that the building of community is a slow and steady process. We must believe in it strongly, even when mistakes are made. Learning how to grow together, to say, "I'm sorry," and begin again. Learning to see our gifts and the gifts of others and how we are stronger together. As Elliot Kemmler said in the reading, I choose to believe in community. I choose to believe in the difficult, slow work of building a common life. I believe in the strength and the goodness of neighbors living side by side, finding each other's lost goats and gravestones, even when we do not agree. My friends, I do believe in this. I believe in you. I believe in this shared miracle of grace and mercy, these messy, imperfect miracles of community that we build, that you are steadily building together, your lives interwoven here, in this place that you call home. It's about 5 of, Miss Paisley. What do you think?